Alright guys, I want to get back into part 2 of this episode about the Council of Nicaea, or the 7 councils, I guess technically. So I'm gonna add these notes. So I'm gonna first go through the notes, but just to let you know, the notes are mostly taken from Wikipedia. It was just kind of the easiest thing that I could do. But just a refresher, if you didn't listen to episode 1, we kind of started talking about, what was Christianity like, before all this stuff was solidified. So before the year, let's estimate like 800 AD or so. Before that year, and even maybe before the year 300 or so, because it turns out that, I guess there were no New Testament texts between the years about 45 to like 95 or so, or 49 AD to 95 AD was when the last New Testament book was finished. And of course, I think a lot of people know this, but the Bible isn't organized by chronological books, and there are other books that weren't added as biblical books in the Old Testament or New Testament, and Jews have other books. They have the Mishnah, the Oral Torah. They have the Talmud, the commentary on the Oral Torah. Those are big, many, many, many books like that are very detailed, that most Christians, other than the ones who just kind of study that kind of stuff, most Christians don't read that. They don't, a lot of them might not even know that it exists. But Jews who study a lot, very religious Jews, they will study those types of texts a lot. And most people probably know this too, but with the Jewish Parsha, annual cycle, from about Rosh Hashanah, they start a new, I don't know when it, like, I guess technically after these like holy days around Rosh Hashanah, there's a certain point where they begin the Parsha again from Genesis 1:1 and go all the way through to the end of Deuteronomy. That ends right before Rosh Hashanah of the next year, which is the lunar New Year on the Jewish calendar. And so, usually, people who are religious Jews, who study, are at least reading the Torah. The ones who are studying more, daily, who have time to do it and everything, are studying, Talmud. And this is pretty routine. This is pretty routine. People do this almost daily. People do this. And when they go to synagogue on Saturday, there's a portion that's read. It's a specific portion that's set for that day of the weekly portion. And then, once it's Saturday night, technically Saturday sundown, starts the new day, and that's when the next parsha would start, and it ends so every day there's like a portion. Excuse me, I don't know why my voice is always getting so weird when I'm recording lately. But yeah, so that's just some little tidbits to add. So yeah, I'm not used to talking about biblical history, but as far as like when it starts getting into like Orthodox church history and history of Catholicism and all that, I am really like, I can't even tell you really Protestant history for the most part. I can only really tell you a bit about Adventist history. So, you know, and I can tell you some about Jewish history, but I can't really tell you about all the stuff in between. So that's what I'm trying to learn more. Um, all right, so let's go. So so there were these first 7 ecumenical councils, and these councils basically were to solidify, for the most part, what is the church accepting as belief and what is the church rejecting. Because there were a lot of different beliefs, but a lot of it had to do with Jesus and the divinity of Jesus and Mary, virgin birth, all these types of topics that, a classic Jew would not adhere to that. So if you think about what classic Jews believe, I say classic because there are people who are Jewish that have some belief in Jesus to some extent. Some believe he's the Messiah, some don't. Some call themselves Jews for Jesus or Messianic Jews or whatever the term might be. And they still practice Judaism, but they understand some of the Christian traditions and kind of believe it. So, um, that's what I'm identifying as maybe not like a classic Jewish person. A classic Jewish person believes in the Old Testament, not really even in the New Testament at all. They don't even refer to the Old Testament as the Old Testament. They usually use the term Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, the Ketuvim. The Torah, the first 5 books, the Nevi'im means prophets, and the Ketuvim. So they take that TANAKH, kind of like an acronym. Okay, so the first council of Nicaea, the dates were approximately, some say, May 20 to June 19 of the year 325 AD. Some sources that I saw said May to July. Some said May to August. So I don't really know. And these were considered Arian discussions. Now, Arian, this isn't the same word Arian, like Aryan. It's Arian. It says the discussions about the divisive issues of the divinity of Jesus. Like, people didn't really all believe in that Jesus was divine. Some people believe, he's like Moses or like Jacob or like Abraham. Like, he's important, but because even Moses did, you could probably argue he did some kind of miracles. He did, like with the staff and like opening the water and um, hitting the rock and water coming out. And those are the ones that come to mind. And so the portion that was studied was this Arianism, and we'll get to that later in the definition that comes up next, in the First Council of Constantinople. That's going to be next. But Arianism, they argued about the nature of Christ. They had this discussion about the celebration, Passover. They put in parentheses Easter, ordination of eunuchs, because in the Old Testament, in the temple, eunuchs weren't allowed to become priests. Like if you had crushed testicles or some kind of injury like that, like you had to be, I don't know if priest is the right word, because I think Levi's were priests, but there was some kind of, like, if you weren't fully in body, like, perfect, if you had like certain parts missing of your body, including some of your male genitalia, you weren't fully allowed to be like there. Um, there was some um like you'd be like denied to some extent. Now I don't really remember if that means you can't go in or you can't, like if you're a Levi and you would be allowed by lineage, but if you had that kind of either like a deformity or like an injury or like a something like that, I really don't know. But eunuchs, I don't know exactly how to define a eunuch. I always assumed that eunuchs were, they would purposely do that because that's what they chose to do, or they would um, choose, um, they would choose to uh, um, get, certain genitalia parts removed, or somebody would do it to them. Like, um, there were some kingdoms where some of the males, they would castrate them and things like that. I don't know. I don't really like talking about that kind of stuff. It's weird to me. Um, so prohibition of kneeling on Sundays and I don't know what fro means, and I don't know what that is. Oh, and from Easter to Pentecost, and validity of baptism by heretics and lapsed Christians, and um, I don't know what sundry means, sundry other matters, but I literally like copy pasted that. That's kind of generally what was discussed at the Council of Nicaea. Next, some years later, so the Council of Nicaea was 325 AD. So in 381 AD, you have the First Council of Constantinople. This looked at Arianism again. It looked at Apollinarism, Sabellianism, Holy Spirit, and this. They wrote something about successor to Meletius. I don't know who that is. But I'm not gonna clean this up. It has all the little footnote numbers and letters and stuff. I'm just gonna try and copy and paste it all into the description. So Arianism is, it says, heretical belief attributed to Arius. So remember that came up in the First Council of Nicaea as well. Heretical belief attributed to Arius that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, who was begotten by God the Father, with the difference that the Son of God did not always exist, but was begotten / made before time by God the Father. So that area that I just read is kind of talking about, that I think a lot of Christians would understand this, that a lot of times you're taught, in the beginning when God's creating the heavens and the earth, Jesus was there too. I've heard people say that. Or that Jesus existed. He was already there before all the other humans were created, before earth was created, before anything was created. He was there in God. He was there with God. And then it says, therefore, Jesus was not co eternal with God the Father. but nonetheless, Jesus began to exist outside time, as time applies only to the creations of God. So Jesus began to exist outside of creation after God, but not being as eternal as God. So technically, that Jesus was, I guess, created, but before all the heaven and the earth and everything. When it talks about Apollinarism, I've never heard any of these words before. The Arianism or Apollinarism. There's a bunch of other terms I'd never heard before, which is why I copy pasted the information, because I was like, I don't even know how to really paraphrase this. It says, argues that Jesus had a human body and sensitive human soul, but divine mind and not a human rational mind. The divine logos taking place of the latter. It was deemed heretical in 1831 and virtually died out within the following decades. So this Apollinarism, I mean, we've heard this before, that Jesus had I think usually what they say is Jesus had, Jesus was divine and human. You usually hear people say that. You don't usually hear them separate the body, the mind, the rational mind, the soul, all that kind of stuff. Like, so this is a lot more specific than just saying that someone has a belief that Jesus was both human and divine. They would break it down more and say that Jesus had a human body, a human soul, and his mind was divine and didn't have a human rationality to it. Therefore, it had divine logos, but not human mentality. It was divine thinking, divine mind, but physical body. So the body and the mind were separated out, and the soul was also human. So I guess it's like, that's a lot more detailed. I've never heard of anything like that before. And a lot of these things, I'm like, I don't know exactly where the Bible text is for it. Like the specific thing about the Arianism, about, was God made or begotten, co-eternal with God or not co-eternal, but older than the earth, and I don't know, like, how would you know that? Like, how are these things being determined, I guess is what I'd want to know. Because based on what we read, I would say there's not that much detail to it. Like, you can make arguments for things, like that God was there, that Jesus was there, or that God is divine and human, or Jesus is divine and human. You can make these arguments, but to tease out all the, like, the body versus the soul versus the mind versus the rationality, it's like, it seems like you'd have to really either break down just like word for word what Jesus said versus what he did action wise versus what happened to his body physically. Like, it just doesn't seem, I don't know how it would be possible to get that detailed just by the Bible alone. I really don't know. So I don't know. I haven't looked in to see how they came up with determining these. I just looked into the arguments of it and not even necessarily like which church chose what. There's the I am gonna post a link. There's a link to all of this. It has all the council information. It has this chart under the first tab, the first pull down tab. It has this chart that shows, what the year was, which bishops were there, which types of churches either agreed or disagreed with those things that were going on, how many people were at the council. It has like this whole chart about it. So I'll put a link for that too. It'll be with the links that I'm posting. And you can see the link and it'll show all the details. So the next topic in this council was called Senalianism. Senalianism? I don't even know if I'm pronouncing these right. Belief that there is only one person. They call this hypostasis in Greek language, of the 4th century Arian controversy in the Godhead. Belief that there is only one person in the Godhead. That's called Senalianism. So if they say Godhead, does that mean Trinity or not? I don't know. And then Holy Spirit. It says in Nicene Christianity, the Holy Spirit is the third person of the Trinity. So these were the topics, that the Holy Spirit, the Sonalianism, Apollinarism, and Arianism. Those were discussed at the First Council of Constantinople. And I mean, all this stuff is getting discussed like 300 years, 400 years, up to 700 something years after Jesus. It wasn't fully 100% that everybody had a full understanding. Like how the church today, it's pretty common. If you ask people, that's why I say people say things. Like people will say, oh yeah, Jesus is both divine and, and human. Like there's not all these little details into it that people even talk about. Like I've never heard anybody mention these details, or these terms. I've never heard these terms really. Okay, the next one. This is the third council called Council of Ephesus in 431 AD. They bring up this topic called Nestorianism. Nestorianism related to the original teachings of Christian theologian Nestorius, around 450 AD. I think that was, I don't know what his lifespan was, but anyways, this person promoted specific doctrines in the fields of Christology and Mariology. So it's like the study of Christ, the study of Mary. The second meaning of the term is much wider and relates to a set of later theological teachings that were traditionally labeled as Nestorian, but differ from the teachings of Nestorius in origin, scope, and terminology. I don't know. The Oxford English Dictionary defines Nestorianism as the doctrine of Nestorius, patriarch of Constantinople, appointed in 428. I'm going to say that's AD, by which Christ is asserted to have had distinct human and divine persons. There's also this other idea called Theotokos, the title of Mother of God or Mother of Incarnate God. And then there's Pelagianis. The original sin did not taint human nature, and that humans, by divine grace, have free will to achieve human perfection. So these were the ideas at that council. that got discussed in Ephesus. Then there was the Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD. It says not all churches accepted this council. The judgments issued at the Second Council of Ephesus in 449 AD, the alleged offenses of Bishop Dioscorus of Alexandria, the relationship between the divinity and humanity of Christ, many disputes involving particular bishops and sees. I don't know what that means. Then there's the Second Council of Constantinople in 553 AD. So this is like almost 100 years after, a little over 100 years after. They go back to that Nestorianism. They have this other topic of monophysitism. I don't even know how to say these, meaning solitary, and physis, nature. So solitary nature is a Christology that states that in the person of the incarnated Word with the W, capital letter W, that is Jesus Christ, there was only one nature, the divine. Saying that Jesus was only divine, having a solitary nature of only divine and not human nature. Then there's this Origenis. This is one that got really confusing to me. I posted a link to an episode by Census and Fidelium about the Second Council of Constantinople. It's not a very direct video, but it has some information. So I'm just gonna read it though. Origenist. They refer to the Origenist crises or Origenist controversies. I put that this is confusing and I'm not yet sure if I fully understand it. Origin, not origin like Origin. Origin is a person. Origen was considered heretical and to have influenced many. Origen, I don't know if it's a person or an idea. Origen taught that before the creation of the material universe, God had created the souls of all the intelligent beings. These souls, at the first fully devoted God, fell away from him and were given physical bodies. Origen was the first to propose, so it is a person, first to propose the ransom theory of atonement in its fully developed form. And he also significantly contributed to the development of the concept of the Trinity. Origen hoped that all people might eventually attain salvation, but was always careful to maintain that this was only speculation. He defended free will and advocated Christian pacifism. So I don't know if this means, when it says before the creation of the material universe, God had created the souls of all intelligent beings. So I've never heard that. I have heard about this, there's an Ellen G. White book called The Great Controversy, and there's some other theories. I think other people say this too. That that there was, I guess, in heaven, before Earth was created, there were angels. Lucifer was up there. Jesus was up there. There's some debate if the angel Michael and Jesus are the same thing. I don't really know. Somebody told me it's not. I think the Adventist Church teaches that it is. That the angel Michael is Jesus. I don't really know how people can tell. But anyways, I had heard that. I never heard specifically that intelligent beings, that the souls were created. Um, uh, but yeah, I heard about the fallen angels. Um, I never heard about the, those that fell away were given physical bodies. Um, I don't really know how to specify that. I kind of assumed they had physical bodies, but I don't know. Um, okay, there's two more. So the third council of Constantinople was in 680 and 681 AD. They go to this monothelitism, the human and divine wills of Jesus. Monothelitism says that um, Christ as having only one will. The doctrine is thus contrary to Theotokos, a Christology doctrine that holds Christ as having two wills, divine and human. And so, we go to these wills. Did Jesus only have divine will? Did he only have human will? Did he have both divine and human will? So, these are things that I feel like I've never heard the Adventist Church talk about this stuff, but it might be because the Adventist Church is Protestant. Because I even know, like, when I've talked to, like, my Catholic friends and stuff, and they talk about, like, carnal sins and all, like, the Adventist Church doesn't talk about that kind of stuff. Like, they don't distinguish between, like, what's this kind of sin, and, like, we don't have holy confession. We don't, I mean, you could technically do confession if you wanted to confess, but there's no, like, memorized prayers for, like, confessions or the act of contrition and Hail Marys and all. Like, we don't say all these, like, memorized prayers. There's I'd say people say that Our Father prayer, and I've heard people say the doxology. That's just about it. I haven't heard anybody say any other kind of, like, memorized, other than songs. I haven't really heard people say, like, a lot of other memorized stuff. maybe the 23rd Psalm. A lot of people learn that. Um, hmm. And the last one was the Second Council of Nicaea in 787 AD. 787 AD. It talks about this topic of iconoclasm. It says Byzantine iconoclasm was started by a ban on religious images promulgated by the Byzantine Empire and continued under his successors. It was accompanied by widespread destruction of religious images and persecution of supporters of the veneration of images. Now, this is something I barely learned about watching that one guy's videos where he talks to, like, an Orthodox priest, he talks to Catholic priests, and they show that there's these icons, these pictures, either statues or, like, pictures where people can, like, kiss them or venerate them or bow to them or pray to them. I don't know if there's Protestant churches where you see that. You don't see that in the Adventist church at all. They might have pictures, but nobody talks to them or expresses anything to them or kisses them or bows to them or venerates or anything. That they pictures of saints and things like that. Like, we don't usually have those around in the church like that too much. Maybe Jesus, maybe Mary, but I really have never seen a church, an Adventist church, that has a picture of Mary. I've seen maybe Jesus, there might be like a cross with Jesus on it or something, or like a picture of Jesus somewhere. But yeah, there's no venerating of images that might be considered in the Protestant world. That's probably considered more of like idol worship. Especially because it's like they're not all God that are being venerated. It would be like saints like Paul or Saint Patrick or Mary or other people. Um, and we don't pray to them. Protestants don't tend to ask saints to pray for anything for them or pray to the saints at all. Or pray to their dead loved ones or anything like that. I don't know if Orthodox and Catholic groups pray to like their loved ones. I mean, I do come from an actual like tradition of a culture, not that it's a religion I was raised in, but my heritage wise, before people were Christian, the religion involved, you know, um, as a form of like ancestor worship. But I was never a generation that was taught that. We were already, like, my parents were already Adventist or Protestant Christians, and my dad was Adventist, and so I was raised Adventist. I wasn't raised um, to worship my ancestors. We don't have necessarily like a shrine or anything like that. We don't. I'm not saying people shouldn't do it, and I'm not saying people shouldn't, you know, pray to saints or they shouldn't venerate images or icons or anything. I don't know. I literally only learned about this like 3 days ago. I didn't even know that it was like a thing. Um, like it was a thing so much that those churches have it available as part of the worship service that people can go near those items and like do that. Um, but it does seem like such an early belief. Um, the denomination I'm a part of didn't come around till like 1844, and so this stuff was happening back in like 787. And if it comes from the Byzantine um, emperor, um, because maybe people were venerating images of the Byzantine emperor, and they just kind of like took that into the practice of the religion. You know, that kind of makes sense to me because it was like a cultural practice. Um, yeah, I don't really know of Protestant groups that really do that. They don't usually have a bunch of images of saints and stuff on the walls and up front, and if they do, it might be like a little bit. It's not like all over. Um, when people pray, they don't consider praying to, like, I would never consider praying to like Matthew or Luke or John or James or Mary or any of those other people, Paul, any of them. I'm not saying don't do it. It's just it would never naturally come to my mind to like think to do it because I was never like trained to do it. I've never tried doing it. Um, I think in my mind there's a bit of a stigma to it, but I understand and respect that other people do it. I'm not really here to like judge it. It's like I'm not even talking about that topic. Like if that's what they're doing, that's what they're doing. It's just, but I guess I think Jews think the same thing of Christians. They're like, well, why are they worshiping Jesus? Like, why are they praying to Jesus? Why are they praying to this guy? And then when you say the Trinity, it almost sounds like there's three gods, even though people do say it's monotheistic because it's a Godhead, one God with three beings. But I think it's hard for other people to kind of understand that. and it doesn't seem like it was a very clear belief early on. So let me see. Let me read this last sentence. It says the papacy remained firmly in support of the use of religious images throughout the period. And so, yeah, like, I like all these topics. They're very interesting to me, very unique to me. I don't know if I really had all my questions answered because I don't really know where the church kind of decided on these, but it does seem like, good topics to discuss, and it gives an idea for like the types of arguments that were going on during that time. Because I feel like nowadays we kind of just have like a single sentence that we say about those general topics, in the Christian world, and we don't really challenge it in all these details. I would also like to know what texts, these priests and bishops and things were using when they were considering what to choose or what to deny. I mean, after reading through some of them, I would say Protestants and Christians, probably Protestants and Orthodox and Catholics kind of believe most of the same things. I would say the difference is like with Mary, there's like, I don't think that Protestants treat Mary any different, the mother of Jesus, Mary, any different than they treat like the disciples or Paul. They're just kind of like, okay, she's Mary, and these are like they're connected to Jesus, but like they're just other people in Jesus' life, pretty much. I'd say most Protestants believe in the Trinity and believe in the divinity and human nature of Jesus, and believe that Jesus is eternal. I think there's specific people who maybe don't believe those things. I question them. I don't really know. But I could see why it wasn't too clear back then. I still think it's not too clear now, but I think that the churches have solidified what they choose to say. Okay, we can all get on board with this, but it seems like people didn't always believe this. So that part's interesting, but all right, I'm gonna post these up.